So then welcome everybody to the third part of our series on Christianity and Krishna consciousness side by side. In this session, we will cover the topic of sin, which is a serious topic. In the first part, I would like to cover essentially what is the term, what do we talk about when we say sin? What is the concept that we find in the Bible? What is the concept of sin we find in Vedic scriptures, like the Srimad Bhagavatam, also the Bhagavad Gita? Then in the second part, I would like to concentrate on perhaps an even more important topic, which Christians would refer to as redemption. We would refer to as liberation or freedom from sin. So rather the actual attempt of spiritual life, so that we attain elevation to a more pure and higher consciousness. In the last session, we covered more like the teachings of Jesus in the New Testament. Particularly, we looked at the Gospel of Matthew, and we looked at how are there parallels between teachings of the Bhagavad Gita and the teachings of Jesus in the New Testament. We also looked at how Jesus of Nazareth, or like Jesus Christ, was a reformer and revolutionary in comparison to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and also great acharyas like Bhaktivinoda Thakur and A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. So today we will continue again with a very pressing issue, because the more I thought about it, I felt like the topic of sin is always somehow there, and also the topic of becoming free from so-called sin, might be by forgiveness, redemption, liberation. And perhaps sometimes we do not give the proper weight to what actually we are talking about when we discuss or like hear about different ideas of sin or sinfulness. I would like to start to present a general understanding of sin as we find it also in the Christian tradition, but essentially also the Vaishnavas share that understanding. So I will share my screen just in a second. All right, please also let me know in case that if you do not see it, the slides, or when I move to another slide. Just recently in a session I had it, I moved through the slides and thought everyone sees them, but it was not the case. So please also tell me in case you do not see them.
No, it is good.
Okay, so here we have a definition. Sin, the word from the Old English sin, as you see it here, means being guilty of an offense or wrongdoing or misdeed. So it's more like of a legalistic term, which particularly relates to wrongdoing or like overstepping, transgressing the law of God. That would be the religious understanding of what sin is. So, of course, in the Christian context, it means to the law that is being, written down in the Old Testament. So a lack of conformity and or transgression of the law of God, that would be a sin. Another common understanding is that what divides us from God, activities, mentality, this goes together when we speak of sin. So in this way, we might create distance, or like we do create distance from God by neglect or disobedience of the particular laws that we accept as laws of God. If you're a Christian, you of course refer to the Old Testament. If you are a follower of Vedic tradition, you refer to other books like the Srimad Bhagavatam. Some who are a bit more like traditional, they look at the Manu Samhita, which is literally a law book. Manu is considered the father of mankind, and he laid down particular codes of behavior and ethics, morals for human beings to follow. And so as a representative, so to speak, of God, or like of the God of the Vedas, this would also count as being the law of God. And like sin defines itself through not obeying or like to transgressing that law. And the lowest, and on the slide definition, I would like to highlight, since I would put that more in the foreground when we talk today about that concept of sin, is to miss the mark, or to fail to attain one's goal, straying from the path. There's also a common understanding in many Christian groups or traditions that sin is to be understood as that you move somewhere, like you're being tempted to move from what is considered good to what is considered evil, or not following the law, not following or the process of spiritual life as given in maybe another religious tradition. So this is the concept I would like to stress the most today. And we have here also in Christianity 7 particular sins that are considered deadly sins or mortal sins. And I started here with pride, vanity, then envy, greed, lust, wrath, sloth, and gluttony. I don't know how the last 2 words, I'm not a native English speaker, and I don't know how much it is common to use those words in everyday's language in English. So gluttony would be that which is we would call overeating, or like excessive eating, like those who just eat and eat and eat. So that would be considered sin. And sloth, I was told, like in Australia also, the animal which just hangs from the tree, it's called like that. It's laziness or inactivity. You don't work practically. It's just you veg out, as you would say, all day long. So that's considered one of the deadly sins. And pride or vanity is here. I put now on the first place. If you research it on the internet, you might find different listings like about these 7 sins. Originally, there had been 8 sins, but pride and vanity had been put together ultimately as one sin. They go quite along. Maybe a short distinction: vanity, as I understand it, being vain means kind of being in love with yourself, particularly externally, and being very particular, like kind of, we would maybe use the term narcissistic also today in our context. And pride is more like the sense of superiority, or like you being very better than others. And I put that on the first place because in the Christian theology or in the Bible, we find that this sin was actually the beginning or the cause of the fall of Lucifer. We find the description in Garden Eden. We come to that with the original sin, which is an interesting concept in Christianity, which is not to be found like that in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition or Hinduism. There is no original sin in that sense. We will hear about karma and also what is called an anartha. These things are terms that are synonymously with what we consider here to be sin. So it said Lucifer, which means translated as much the sun, or like the morning star, or like the sun of the morning, whatever, how it's sometimes translated. And it said he became vain. He fell in love with his own beauty, and then it also was proud of his own glory, his own wisdom, his own power, and challenged, so to say, the statues of God, wanted to be himself God or being worshipped, and that led to his downfall. So from pride also came envy. Envy is that we see we don't grant someone else a glory, a position, or like even life itself could be. So it's always about putting oneself above and being kind of inimical, or having an inimical attitude or enmity towards someone else. So this caused his downfall, and so therefore I put this in the first place. So we go once ahead, like to hear about original sin and karma. So in Christianity, we have that in Adam and Eve disobey God due to the influence of the snake, which is Lucifer, by eating from the tree of knowledge. So the story was like God did forbid explicitly to Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge. And the snake challenged them, saying, why would you obey? Why don't you eat it? Why shouldn't you? And so successfully tempting Adam, or like particularly Eve. Eve was tempted by the snake to make Adam eat from the apple, and later on also Adam blamed it on Eve when God came to know that they had been eating from the tree of knowledge because they felt shame, they covered themselves. So as a result, they got banned from Garden Eden, which seemed to be, if you take it in a geographical sense, it seemed to be situated somewhat close to Earth, or like at least it was in the same kind of in the creation within there was a Garden Eden. So from there they got banned, and also with some consequences for their ways of living. Like simply put, life got much more difficult in terms of Adam had to work the ground very hard to get food, so in Eden it was easier. Eve also was, as a woman, the labor of childbirth, it was then called, so that these things became difficult. And also the snake became banned. It was Lucifer, became then the devil, or Satan. Satan means the adversary, or the adversary, someone who is opposing. And so he lost his legs. He was before not a snake in the sense as we know it now. He had legs, but then he was cursed by God to lose his legs, to walk on his belly on the ground. So that was the story we find in the Old Testament. And what is here very crucial for the idea of sin is that what Adam and Eve did from that moment on would affect just every human being. They considered to be the original human beings from whom all other human beings come. The story, if you take this account in the Old Testament as complete, poses some difficulties, because we see that other beings were around which did not come from Adam and Eve, and how come that other humans have been around, although Adam and Eve only produced Cain and Abel, and then how come they could, or like one of them could marry and so on. But that's another story. So here we have the original sin that is inherited by all humans from them. That would be the Christian account. So it means everyone coming from Adam and Eve, means all human beings, would be born as sinners. That's the Christian understanding or worldview, and therefore we are in need of forgiveness or redemption. That's how the whole Christian theology builds up on that idea. Okay, we are all sinful and we are in need of forgiveness. We cannot free ourselves from sin like that. We need to be forgiven, which ultimately is being achieved by the sacrifice of Jesus of Nazareth being crucified, and through his blood, through his suffering, the sins of mankind would have been redeemed if you accept that sacrifice of Jesus. So that would be the whole drama, let's call it like this, of from sin to redemption in Christianity. So in Vaishnavism, we have a different concept. We have also, like similar to Lucifer in the single case, there are statements that give us the understanding that there is the capacity of the soul to be envious of God, or to desire an independent state, being yourself practically God-like or God. And there's some rebellion. So about the exact cause, how can it happen? This is a bigger discussion. Also in Christianity, we have that issue. If you take Adam and Eve, like in the Garden of Eden, or the soul in the spiritual sky, how come evil would be there? Like the question of evil we'll discuss later. And yes, exactly. So, but the point is, there is the capacity of the souls, means us, to be envious of God or desire an independent position. So what here in Vaishnavism, or what we are being taught, is that God creates a material world for that. It's not that he intended the world exactly to be for those obeying God. Of course, it would be his desire, but he also makes that space for those who actually have not, or do not have the desire to be in union with God, so they can live in separation. So, and he introduced a law called the law of karma, which binds the soul in a positive and negative sense. So We will hear later also some verses of the Bhagavad Gita that describe how the souls actually create their own happiness and distress and good and evil. Because the concept of good and evil is something very relevant to the idea of sin, and also free will be a very crucial aspect of it, because sin, or like responsibility for acting a certain way, actually has to go along with free will. If there's no free will, there can be no question of morality or being having a responsibility. Karma or sin can be shared. That's maybe where we can make a bit of a connection to the Christian idea of original sin. It's not that it is necessarily inherited. It has to do with one's individual actions that we can also share with others by collective karma in terms of a society, in terms of a family. It can also be taken away. We will hear later also a story how Indra, the king of heaven, a demigod, shared karmic or sinful reactions, which is a fascinating topic. How does that work? Then we must somehow imagine sin as a particular type of thing that you can distribute or share with others, perhaps by some form of ritual, or I don't know. So karma can also be collectively accumulated. All right. So there we have this distinction between original sin and karma. So let's move on quickly, because I want to spend only half the time with that. So the problem of evil we addressed shortly. That's in Christianity, of course, the theology, or those in Christianity have to figure out like to solve the problem in their tradition, because usually when it comes to the question of why is there evil, and with evil we don't mean the little things, that you can be unpolite, or like you cheat someone, or like you whatever, give someone a slap. It goes up to the very most cruel acts that a human being is possible to perform. And the question would be, if God is a loving and all omniscient and omnipotent God, why would he actually allow that? Why is evil there? And many personalities over the last centuries in Christianity and other traditions always defend the viewpoint that evil has nothing to do with God, which is a difficult proposition, because also in the Vedas it is said that Krishna, or God, is the absolute truth, and the absolute truth is defined by that everything is the absolute truth is that from which everything emanates. Janmadi yasya ataha. This is in the first shloka of the Srimad Bhagavatam, that Krishna is the source of everything, so he must also be the source of evil. If he created everything, then also that what we call evil must have its origin in him. So we will differentiate a bit more on that in later verses. So somehow or other, also in Garden Eden, Satan was already there, and somehow or other, like as Lucifer in his original form, as an angel on the side of God, a guardian angel actually, close to the throne of God, somehow or other got affected by what is called pride and envy. So the evil, or whatever is evil is called, has been there somehow or other, and not only on the earth but there. So the problem is, like, what is it, and how did it get there, and why did it get there? So in Vaishnavism, we have a different understanding of evil. In the transcendental world, it is that like evil is not present. Evil is a concept in connection to the relativity of the material world, and it relates to how we act in a given body. The soul is said to be sinless. There is no sin to the soul. Sin refers to the rules or laws of the material nature, whether you keep them or don't keep them. So sin is about like how you deal with the property of God, his intention in terms of the material energy. And there we find Vaishnavism teaches us there's the influence of a false ego, which is an element that makes you think you are something that you are not. In the first place, a material body. And based on a material body, the soul develops a sense of either superiority, inferiority, of better and lesser, higher and lower, and acts based on that. So Krishna provides some ingredients that can be used or misused. So, but it's up to the soul what it does with them. So therefore, God in Vaishnavism is not responsible for the evil that the living entities do. The living entities are the creators, which we will hear in these verses. We have in the 13th chapter, text number 21, saying, Karya karana kartritve hetu prakriti uchite purusha sukha dukhanam bhaktritve hetu uchite. Nature is said to be the cause of all causes. Of our nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and defects, whereas the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. So it is explained, the nature provides the ground of duality. So this is rather neutral. It depends on what the soul chooses to do with the nature, and then it creates cause and effect, which we call karma. And even more important, like explicitly the term evil is in the next verse. Purusha prakriti stohi bhunte prakriti jangunan karanam guna sangosya sat asat joni janmusu. That the living entity in the material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus, he meets with good and evil among various species. So here said the point is like, why do we even meet evil? Good and evil is a concept that arises from the identification with matter, which is in a duality of light and dark, of heavy and light, of how to say, powerful and powerless, and so on. So there's always a duality in terms of also male, female. There is of gods and humans, animals, humans, and so on. There's always distinction and differentiation. And we see differences, and based on that, give different values to different living entities and treat them accordingly, as maybe we being more valuable than them than others. Big topic is also, when we speak of sin, is like killing for the sake of eating. Last time we couldn't cover the aspect of vegetarianism within Christianity and also Vaishnavism. The time was not allowing really for it. But looking at sin, it is considered very sinful to kill an unliving entity for gratifying one's tongue. So it is not sanctioned by the Vedas that someone kills animals, particularly the cow is highlighted. And we find also in the Old Testament, actually in the quite in the beginning, that God instructed Adam and Eve like what he designated as foodstuffs, and he said all the seeds and grains, the roots, like all like kind of particular types of plants. He said those are meant for your food. And then later he says he designates, okay, for the animal food is this and this and that. And then he tells them like that they should rule over. He tells the humans to rule over the world. So it can be taken as a clear indication for actually vegetarian diet within also Christianity. Later in the book of Daniel, is also an interesting story. Daniel found himself in a situation that Jerusalem got occupied by a king called Nebuchadnezzar, and this king, of course, like as if there's always when there's occupation, they, of course, the occupiers try to get locals in their administration because also language, the culture, and it shows kind of some synthesis, or like there's some kind of considered successful, like Sanatan Goswami, Rupan Sanatan Goswami, who had been previously working with the Muslim ruler, in his service. So Daniel also worked in the service of that, and he was supposed, there were many wizards and fortune tellers and like some kind of seers around, and the king had a dream that he wanted those who are of that profession to interpret, but he would not tell the dream. His challenge was, you have to tell the dream that I had without me telling you, and then interpret it accurately, and that was impossible for most of them, and the king threatened them to just in a cruel way kill them and crush their houses and families. So quite a heavy, severe person like King Vena. So Daniel also was in that situation, and he came forward to interpret the dream. But the thing was, he was living with the king and two of his friends, so there were three of them, and the king ordered, of course, his servants that they provide him with the particular food that they were supposed to eat in the king's association. It was particular meat and stuff and so on. Daniel asked one servant to not do that because he felt he did not want to become ritually unclean, which in my understanding relates to the Jewish understanding what is kosher and not. It not necessarily means that he has been a vegetarian, but it means that by his dietary laws, he would not be eating meat like this as it has been served by the king. So he asked whether they can get only vegetables and water. And the servant was very concerned. I mean, he had some affection for Daniel, so he was actually inclined to support him, but said, well, but what if you don't do well and look well and healthy? The king will get upset and kill me. So Daniel assured him, no problem, it will not be like this. And they got vegetarian food, they got only vegetables and water, and they looked even brighter and they were more stronger than the others. So he also see again how like it can be taken as an indication that vegetarian diet is proper, like even food that is superior. And Daniel was ultimately able to also tell the king the dream and interpreted it properly. So if you want to know more about that, you have to go a bit into the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. It's the book of one of the prophets' books. Yes, so this was that about the sin of killing. And we now looked at sin in terms of, I have to see if I find proper. It's the wrong one. All right, yeah, that the living entities have a choice in sinning. We had once a discussion back then when I was quite young, still in Krishna consciousness in Germany. We had in Leipzig, we had a center and we had our Sunday program, different guests came. Some of the guests were young Christians and they came to enlighten us about how we are actually quite wrong about that we try to purify ourselves by actions. We consider like spiritual actions to be purifying, that we can be released of karma, that this is actually like a kind of arrogance or like a offense toward God, because only God can take away sins. And one has to accept Jesus the Christ to be free from sin. And all those others who try to go through righteous actions, which also the Jews would do, like according to the Old Testament, they are wrong practically. So the challenge is, okay, if you are a sinner by birth, you can't help it but to be a sinner because you inherited sin. So it's nothing of you doing that can prevent that. So you have to be sinful. How can you be held responsible? It's completely absurd and also cruel. If God punishes you for something that you can't even prevent, where your will doesn't play any role, how can you be held responsible for it? So that's the big dilemma, the philosophical dilemma, this kind of thought or like philosophies in. So actually, as also Immanuel Kant pointed out, without free will, there is no morality. One has to have a choice in order to be held accountable for actions. But we always have to speak of relative free will. There's no absolute free will. As living entities, we just have a certain degree of influence. Since we are in our existence dependent on God, we cannot be absolutely free. God can be, because he's not dependent on anyone for his own existence. So that would be the argument. Let's skip that. Yeah, the concept of karma, we will hear. Karma means activity. There are different stages of karma. And we have in the Vedic tradition what is called sin. In the Christian tradition is called vikarma in the Vedic tradition. Karma means simply action, usually action which is in accordance with religious law or pious activity. Whereas vikarma is that which goes against this religious scriptures or religious law to be found in the Vedas. And there's even something called ugra karma, which is particularly heavy activity, which causes immense results in terms of suffering. For example, the use of atomic energy is considered one of these things, like ugra karma, because we have to understand, like, the world or the cosmos is all energy that is in motion and dynamic. Whatever choice we do, like every word I speak now, every action, like every movement, every gesture I do, is a certain type of energy I send out in the universe, as you do as well. With everything you say and do, and even the thoughts, like subtly we vibrate energy. So this has an effect within the cosmic dynamic of energy. So this is how karma works. It comes back at the energy, how to say, is always, of course, attempting to be balanced. And if we act in one way and make a change, it comes back and always in a balancing way, in a good and in so-called evil way. So if there's intense exploitative and destructive energy being sent out, of course it comes also back like this. And this is also what is this physicist? Is it Newton? Isaac Newton formulated that type of. No, it slipped my mind. Yeah, this principle of every cause has an according effect. Like there's always this principle. So then we also have the VR karma, which is an activity which has no consequence in that sense, as a rather liberating activity. And here depends really on the consciousness. If I'm really acting truly with my deepest heart and the behalf of God, only serving and try to please Him, I'm not anymore responsible for the actions, because I'm not motivated by my own ego or own desires, but I attempt to please the Supreme Lord, and that would have a different result. Okay, we can later also discuss that a bit more. So again, here's some overview. Like, it's maybe sometimes nice to see the visually sin, vikarma, and anartha. Oh yeah, this anartha is added. Maybe I have to skip to it. Now, give me again, please, feedback if you see all the slides. Not that I go through slides again and no one else sees them, but it's just me. Do you see the slides? Okay. Okay, that's good.
Yes, we can see the slides.
Thank you. Yes, anartha means literally no meaning. Prabhupada also says unwanted things that hinder our spiritual progress. And what we heard before as the mortal sins in Christianity, we find here listed under the anarthas: lust, greed, anger, envy, pride, vanity, ignorance, cruelty, etc. There are quite a lot. And I made here a distinction. I described, I said, they arise from sin and reinforce a sinful mentality and disposition towards sinful activities. So sin and anartha are not exactly the same thing. They go hand in hand. In my understanding, sin comes from being in touch with the material energy, accepting a false ego, and then acting in a materialistic spirit. And this is like the parent who produces children, and the children are the anarthas, the disposition toward further sinful activities due to association with the material nature. We before heard the verses from the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. So our attempts in our spiritual life are also to get free from anarthas, to not feed those qualities, so rather develop a saintly character and become sinless or pure in order to be qualified to reunite with God, or like to enter the kingdom of God. So we have these three things: sin, vikarma, and anartha. All of these three things cause separation from God due to transgression of the laws of God. And here again, failing to attain one's goal or straying from the path. We presented this definition of sin in the beginning. Straying from the path is, I think, very good, because it points to that the soul has a spiritual self-interest, and by following the directions of God in the given scripture, which leads to elevation, then it's acting in its own self-interest, is, so to speak, on the proper path. But straying from the path, like and slipping into self-destructive behavior is sin because one does not realize one's true calling and mission in regard to the relationship we have with God. So that would be with the comparison. So sin, karma, and anartha, these things are there. Like we actually have the very same understanding of sin in Christianity as we have also in Vaishnava culture. Maybe there might be some more distinctions or like some more qualities are being added. Of course, the philosophy in the Vedic scriptures usually a bit more differentiated, depending what scripture you read, but also many Christian philosophers gave a lot of thought on it and like elaborately wrote on what you can read in the Bible. All right. So far, are there from your side any questions or comments in that regard? We can discuss.
So as always, I've got one. So when you said we are kind of at one point, I think you said we have that kind of what's the thing? We're free to commit any sins or goods as we please. So where does that free will and sort of the anarthas come in? Because what I understood, maybe I got the complete wrong end of the stick, from what you just mentioned, was that having those anarthas or unwanted thoughts then leads to inevitably sinful actions. So where does that free will and controlling all those kind of tie up together?
Yes, that's a subtle topic. That's also big philosophers and thinkers spend a lot of time and energy to assert that, and it was a big debate on, is there even free will? That's something also nowadays it goes on, because the modern science rather proposes a naturalistic deterministic worldview where we say we are determined by our genes, by our hormones and whatnot. So like more being seen as bio machines that respond to impulse and output and so on. And the question arises, if everything is natural law, like, or necessity, how can we consider ourselves being a choice? Also, Bhagavad Gita says that everyone is forced to act helplessly according to the three modes of nature. No one can therefore stop to do anything at any given time, as we find in the third chapter. And Immanuel Kant pointed out that the problem with deterministic worldview to say there's cause and effect in nature, no free will, is that you could endlessly trace back cause and effect, or like it would be an infinite line. So one cause would have, or one effect would have another cause. You can trace that back to this, and you would be endlessly going. But then you contradict the whole concept of causality, because if there's cause and effect, you must have a beginning. So if it's infinite, then there's no beginning. So then there's the whole thing doesn't work out. So he then proposed you have to think outside the box. There's a transcendent beginning. That means at some given point, each of us, we can start a particular line of cause and effect, which again has its own dynamic then, and we are like having different strings, so to speak, of causal lines going on. So, and they're like always in between. Sometimes we are aware that we have a choice and we really use it. Sometimes we feel rather pushed and urged. So it's a matter of also introspection and becoming more conscious of when do I have actually the most range of choice, and when I'm rather helplessly pushed around by the circumstances or by my own physical and mental body. So these things always, like, they're not always so clear to assert. Is that okay?
So essentially, like within Christian consciousness, there's no sort of start, because whereas in Christianity, maybe that the moment when Adam and Eve, disobeyed God, that you could almost say that was the starting point. Whereas with us, where is the starting point? Is there a starting point at all?
Yeah, Srila Prabhupada explains on that. He says, when he speaks also, the soul is anadi or beginningless. He says also material nature is explained in Bhagavad Gita as beginningless. So he often says there's no point of tracing out in history this first beginning is not there. It is rather like, since the soul is timeless, it has nothing to do with time. It exists already outside of time. When it gets in touch with material energy, it gets affected, and then there's some kind of, how to say, maybe a transitional period when you start to choose to act in a material nature, but there's not necessarily the first act. It's a mystery. Srila Prabhupada also says it's like he how to say, discourages a bit the quest for trying to figuring that out, because he says that you can't. Just more accepting the philosophical perspective on that there is a choice, but you cannot trace back the kind of first moment, because it's not such a clear line, because there's like energetic fields and how things work from subtle to gross might differ, and the soul is individual and might have different desires at the beginning, and then enters the material nature, and according to desires then starts to act.
No, because it's interesting, because obviously there's like Buddhism and other spiritual faiths, they all believe in the soul, and lots of them also believe in the concept of karma, and that the idea of causality that we just spoke about. But so that's why I was very curious, is there like a beginning? Because nobody really talks about it. Everybody says, oh, you've taken this birth because you've done some, karma, essentially, that, I think there's some verses in the Gita, isn't there, whatever thought you have the last minute, that's that'll be what you take, what birth you take next. So but I was just curious whether there was actually a starting point, because nobody really talks about where it all started.
Yeah, because it's for one part, because it's very difficult to trace that start. We have to understand that also from the Vaishnava philosophy, we say the souls exist eternally, and the first thing they accept when they enter material nature is the false ego, which is so subtle. It must be almost how to say, equal to the soul, so that the soul does not notice so much the difference between the false ego and itself. If it would be so obvious, oh, that's a gross body, and then I'm actually completely non-material, it couldn't fool me. But if it's so kind of subtle that it like I can really misidentify it as myself, then it's something on a very different level. Then comes the subtle body gradually, and we act and kind of in this way, and then developing a gross body. Like there's a whole procedure, like how the consciousness get mixed in the material energy. And there's always, this is something puzzling also for me, like in our philosophy, that we say, in one sense, we say we are not the doers. Material nature does everything. And we are just on a co-pilot, so to speak. We sit there and witness the things, and we can desire something. The famous picture of the chariot with the 5 horses, which are the senses, and there's intelligence and the mind trying to guide the horses, and we just sit there in the chariot, giving us the impression we don't do anything, we are just helplessly in there. At the same time, then when we come to karma, we are considered to be doers, or sometimes purusha, the term controller is applied to the living entity, also because we actively will what is going on. We desire things, and we see also that we can, for example, also omit activities where you feel an urge to. For example, you can, in a discussion, you can have an urge to say something, but you say, I don't speak, better not. Or like on the other hand, you feel like, okay, I have to just say what I have in my mind. So like there, in this sense, you always see there is some range of where you can have an influence, and sometimes you don't have so much influence. But the term anadi is significant. It says beginningless. The soul is beginningless. Material nature as an energy is beginningless. And then only time is an energy that suddenly creates a sphere, or like surrounds the jiva, and suddenly then there's a beginning and end. But for the soul, in its existence, there's no beginning and no end. This is actually a very foreign concept for the soul. We have very much adopted, but actually time is something not existing in the spiritual world. So therefore, I guess that's why we always seek like in the beginning, but we cannot think outside of time and space, and that's the problem. Because the beginning lies outside of time and space. So there we come to our limits of understanding, and we, I think, must kind of try to be satisfied with, what also Srila Prabhupada, for example, says, and he says, this is not to be figured out by a human mind, but what is the exact beginning. But we can understand that we do create or co-create with our actions and activities. The principle of karma we can observe in our daily life, although we might not be able to go back to the ultimate beginning. All right. Okay. So far to the topic of sin, and soon I would like to move to actually what is even more relevant, the redemption. In Christianity, we have the understanding, we said it before, the whole religion bases on that there is a sin which man cannot be freed by itself, and it required the sacrifice of Jesus of Nazareth on the cross, and through his sacrifice, mankind get redeemed. And by accepting the sacrifice, one can become free of sin and become qualified to be reunited with God in the kingdom of God. In the Vedic tradition, it's more like, yes, you also are affected by what is called sin in terms of mentality, activities, and results. But it is about also you acting in a way that you don't accumulate more sins, but you still also depend, of course, on the mercy, or like grace, as in the Christian tradition, there would be a lot about grace, that we depend on God's mercy to be liberated. So we share that understanding. At the same time, what we have in Krishna consciousness or Gaudiya Vaishnavism is that we have a big part in it by consciously contributing to our purification. Also, there's a big debate between, for example, Roman Catholics and the Protestants. They argue on that point a lot, because the Roman Catholics in this regard are closer with their understanding to what we do than the Protestants. Protestants insist more like we depend only on grace, and it's kind of even arrogant to think that you can, by your good deeds or righteous actions, do something or add to your purification or elevation. Whereas in Roman Catholic, or like in this practice, you have so many rituals and things that purify you, like the confession and different other kind of processes that are being applied. But a Protestant would argue, if you truly received the grace, why would you over and over have to renew it? So that's a whole discussion for itself. But we also say, we have to act consciously, and forgiveness is a very crucial part, because we say the Vaishnavas believe God is present in his name. He's not different from his name. So, and we can, by chanting of the name, we associate with the most pure being, which is not in any way under the influence of material nature, but rather the total superior of nature, of material nature, and thus we can also become again free and superior to material nature, because we are, as parts and parcels of God, have that nature actually. We are superior to matter. So what he does is, his name is there, and he's not different from him. Srila Prabhupada uses the analogy like if you put an iron stick in fire, the iron will adopt the qualities of fire. So the fire would be the holy name, and we would be the conditioned souls in an iron state. Connect with the fire, we accept gradually again our spiritual qualities and become free from the material qualities. And this will liberate us. So as I said, the holy name of God, like particularly in the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, Hare Krishna Drama, can free one from more sins than one can even commit. And here it becomes actually a very serious thing. I mean, before it was also serious. I addressed that sin is not about the small things. We talk also about very severe things, up to the utmost level of cruelty a human being is capable to. That we say by the grace of God, like is represented for us in the holy name, whereas it is represented for the Christians in the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. So accepting that grace comes along also with a great responsibility. Because if I cheaply just say, like that is the big critique also on Roman Catholics. You go to your confession, and then the priest tells you so much, this and that. I say so many times Ave Maria and so many times this type of mantra. So then you're clear again, which is a very how to say, for some very outrageous, because they don't see how can that balance a sin, for example, as grave, let's say, as murder, as rape, as whatever kind of things that a human being is capable of. So it comes here like to it is what is required if one gets such a powerful tool of grace, in order to that grace actually can fully manifest within the person. It needs a very deep and profound respect and appreciation for the grace. If it's very cheaply taken, okay, Jesus died for me and I accept that, and well, I'm saved, then I don't have a, how to say, firm, how to say, ground necessary to stop acting bad, because I rather might feel relieved that I can slack off, or like just do things, We have also for the holy name that we say that many offenses you can commit, and one of the worst offenses is that you use the holy name with the understanding that you can become purified by it from sinful activities. So it's not its purpose. It's not like a how to say, clean brush where you just clean yourself with. It has the effect, but it's not the purpose of the holy name. So we can maybe take that with us to understand, okay, if we really accept that philosophy in either whatever tradition, that we can be saved or like be relieved from sin through these processes. And if you consider what kind of sins a man is capable of and what we might have already performed in terms of sin, to be very appreciative and very respectful toward the form of redemption we are offered. Because otherwise it won't work. Krishna sees it. I mean, God is not stupid. I mean, why would he, give you something where you feel and be kind of, where you can kind of apparently cheat him with, it's not how it works. So we see this is maybe a topic that is a bit controversial, because we also might have followers also in the movement for Krishna consciousness who might be similar to some Christian followers who might insist, on the grace and neglect the part of righteous action or of purificatory actions. To that part, are there any comments or questions from your side? Also, those who might have joined us on Facebook, please feel free to put your comments or questions in the comment section, and then we'll see if I can get to them.
Sorry, I know I usually look out to the Facebook feed, but my laptop's dead, so I can't really get
no problem.
the phone's all I got, sorry.
All right. Okay, I would move on. I would share a story from the Srimad Bhagavatam with Indra, which very much illustrates the whole point of how sin is affecting a living entity, because I think this is very important to see what is that sin is not only a concept or idea, but it is a factual thing. Before I explain a bit like the energetic exchange we do, like with every word we say, with every gesture, we send out a certain energy in the universe, and a dynamic is created, which comes back to us at some point. So, and we have in the 6th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam an account of Indra, who a few times performed a very severe sin, and that is the sin of killing a Brahmana. Brahmana is considered to be the highest of human beings, since he is a very elevated God-conscious being, but also, of course, it would be a great sin to kill other living entities. So here we see 3 pictures of the story of Vitrasura. You see him, he also is here very big. His name, Vitra or Vritrasura, means the one who covered everything. Vritra is like very huge, and ultimately Indra killed him. We have to see a bit the foreplay to that story, which is that Indra once got favored by a Brahmana called Vishvarupa, to provide Indra with what is called the Narayana Kavacha, which is a spiritual armor actually for the body, consisting of mantras. It's elaborately explained in the 6th canto. You might want to read those chapters. So Vishwarupa also is explained that he has 3 heads, and through each head he drank a different type of liquid. And he was performing sacrifices that what Brahmanas are doing for the demigods, but also he shared oblations in the fire for the demons. And this was because on his father's side he was Brahmin, but on his mother's side he was a demon. So somehow or other, Brahman and the demon species, they united and performed this, and produced Vishwarupa. So what Vishwarupa was doing is he, of course, gave oblations also to the demons, and when Indra came to know that, he reacted impulsively, apparently, and cut off all the 3 heads of Vishwarupa, killing him. So that was, of course, he was guilty of the sin of killing a Brahmana, and it said he was actually capable to counteract it himself, which is an interesting statement. What does that mean, that he could counteract that sin? He must have some mystic capacity to, let's call it, if you speak of energy, to balance the kind of energetic dynamic he created. But he chose to accept it. And it said he suffered for 1 year. It is not exactly described how he suffered, just that he suffered. And then he shared the remaining sinful reactions with 4 entities. He shared with the earth, and based on that, the earth created deserts. That was part of the reaction or the energetic response to killing a Brahmana. They also got in return a blessing for the earth. It was more. No, I don't even remember what it was. Okay, I have to read. Then he also shared with the trees. And the trees got the blessing in return for them accepting part of the reaction, that their twigs and branches, they would regrow after being cut off, for example. But as a result of accepting the sinful reaction, they would produce some liquid coming from the trees, which is not to be consumed. And also maple syrup, for example, would count among these things for those who are maple syrup likers, and myself actually also. So it would count as far as I was told, that would count as one of the liquids. Then also he shared with the ocean or with the water, and it said then the ocean became got the blessing of increasing the volume of a substance that it got mixed with. So I didn't really understood that fully. I thought that's clear, but simple physics.
I'm
But
not getting anything. For the vaccines, they started and we didn't get any.
yes. Now we did it now. Yeah, so we were with the trees, right? So no, the water. Then, and as a result of the sinful reaction, they became kind of bubbly, bubbles are being created when water is being used, or how to say, being set into motion, and one should avoid that bubbly part.
Tides, is it tides? Tidal waves?
Perhaps I would have to see. There was just a mention of bubbles. I didn't manage to have I wanted to see the text again, but I didn't have the page open. And at last, he also shared like the woman as a whole, as a species, or like as a whole. They agreed also to take some part of the reaction. The blessing was that they could also enjoy sexual intercourse or like fulfill lusty desires while being pregnant without that the embryo gets hurt. As a result, they started to have what is called menstruation, with the whole pains that go along with it. So that is like how Indra shared the remaining sinful reactions in agreement with these different entities, which I find is a very interesting way how this works apparently. So there is some kind of sin in terms of a thing that can be shared on agreement, obviously, like if you're in a certain level of power to do that. so what would happen, the father of Vishvarupa was not, of course, just sitting there, like he was a Brahmin. And I think Tashta was his name, and he performed the sacrifice in which he produced the demon Vitrasura. Vitrasura was actually a Brahmana in a demon's body. Also, the father of Vishvarupa, he chanted some mantra rather longer than it was supposed to be short, so it changed a bit the whole outcome. And so Vitrasura was a very powerful, actually, devotee in the body of a demon. So it happened that he had to be killed because he challenged not just Indra but all the other demigods. It was very powerful, and the demigods encouraged Indra, but to do that he was not willing. He was reluctant to say, I cannot kill a Brahmin, because he noticed how this is a great devotee, actually, a devotee Brahmin. And they tried to convince him by saying that the name of Narayan was mentioned, the holy name you can chant, and by this holy name one can be free from all kinds of sins. Even one could kill the whole universe. It is written like this in the 6th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And so actually Nam Aparad, consciously saying, I can do that and purify myself from chanting. And we will also perform Ashwamedha sacrifice, which means a horse sacrifice, was powerful. So encouraging Indra to perform this act with the, say, prospect, or like with the idea, like you can purify yourself by the holy names of Vishnu and by Yakya for Vishnu. So ultimately, Indra, of course, killed Vitrasura. It was a whole procedure till he could manage that. But what happened is, it was not so simple. We see here in the second picture, Indra is running away from this creature in the air. Maybe you see it a bit small. But this is called a Chandala Woman, which is a dog eater, very low class person. And she was infected with tuberculosis. And her whole dress was also bloody, and it says she out of her mouth came a very bad fishy odor. She was really disgusting in so many ways. And she came after Indra and saying, wait, and wanted to get him. So, and he ran away. And there's this Manasa Sarovar, this is the lake where Indra took shelter. And we see him then here sitting within the fibers of a lotus flower. He remained there for many, many years because, and was performing actually austerity. And then the sin, personified sin, moved away. And this is something very interesting. We see here that sin manifested as a person. We have simply in Christianity, we have the evil one, like the Satan, the personified evil, for example, which is a bit different from a personified sin, obviously. We have also the Papa Purusha, which is a personified sin, which is on the Ekadashi relevant, because we say then he enters grains and beans and so on, so that we don't eat them that day. So there's personification as well. And later, of course, Indra could then perform also the Ashwamedha sacrifices and purify himself gradually. But we see that for the sin he performed has an immense reaction. And we can also look at in our lives, perhaps that what we experienced already in terms of suffering must have had, of course, quite some, must have a cause. If you accept that things don't come blindly and randomly to us, So we can consider how severe things might be, particularly if we get back to the vegetarianism with eating animals, killing animals, which is so normal nowadays, or killing other people for whatever reasons. So these things fall back on someone, like as we see here with Indra, in various ways, and this actions, the activities or the reactions might be severe and not just easily being handled. It's also not just like simple one-on-one. One principle of karma is that you're not just responsible for the single act, for example, of killing. You're also responsible for the secondary reaction this killing causes within a given environment. Let's assume one man kills another man like this. So, of course, one act is the killing. And as a result, this man might also be being killed in another life the same way, maybe by the same soul or man coming in another body. What also happens is, let's assume this man was a family man having a wife and children. So what happens to this family is they lose a father. Okay, so it can also happen that then also the person who kills the man shares reactions for that, for the suffering that is caused to his family. So it might mean then that this person takes birth in a family and must experience that his or her father gets killed. And then there might be many other secondary reactions. And for like, there's so many things because we don't even aware of, you know, it's like you throw one stone in the water, but it makes many, many waves. So in this way also with karmic reactions, depending on how severe they are, it's not just one, okay, I just did only that, so therefore only that comes back to me. No, there's a whole range of, because we do not see the full range of what we cause necessarily with our actions. So therefore one is strongly cautioned to don't perform certain acts. Maybe from this perspective, you can also understand why there's sometimes so much stress on prohibitions. It's not just that you feel oppressed or like that there's some tyranny pushed upon you. It's also about like preventing you from self-harm in that sense, of making you aware this is something that has severe consequences. So then there's the whole procedure, as you see with Indra, he had to do a lot of purification, a lot of effort to counteract that sin. So we can see our spiritual life, if you take shelter at the holy name, we will receive and relief from sinful reactions. At the same time, we carry great responsibility to stay in the grace, so to say, and to not, how to say, make offenses toward it. All right. Again, I would open up for questions or comments in this regard. See if there's something.
Sorry, just a question. The story of Indra in the 6th canto, which chapter was it, please? I'm quite curious to read it.
Yes, I can open it here. Right there. Yes, we have the 6th canto. We have a few chapters. It starts actually with chapter 8, the Narayan Kavacha shield, and goes till chapter 13. There are a few chapters that tell the story and also the sinful reactions. Chapter 13 is called King Indra afflicted by sinful reaction. So there, this description is there. Just also remember that before I came to Krishna consciousness, I was in a Protestant free church for a while. And my first experience also with praying and connecting to God happened there. And I also remember how I experienced a form of relief from what I would call now, karma, or might it be sinful reactions within this prayer. There was even like, I mean, don't call it a vision in this really immense sense, but I had some kind of image, like seeing it in front of me, like it took form of a spider, and it was a huge spider that was kind of crawling away. And the experience was like I got something got lifted from me, and that was through the process of consciously linking or connecting to God, in the sense through Jesus. And also later on, when I got my first initiation in the Holy Name, I also felt that there was something lifted, something was being taken. It's also considered, if you take an initiation on the Holy Name and the fire yagya mantras are chanted, and karma is being burned. Therefore, you don't eat the bananas that have been in that fire, because it's that they capture actually all the sin that be thrown away. They're not for eating. So like there's a ritual that also is about burning or relieving you of karma or sin, and it's there, and we should be very conscious to appreciate the grace that is there in methods or processes that we are being given in our whatever tradition we are in.